A female police officer slept in her soot-stained cruiser with her German Shepherd for 4 straight nights while her town burned. She didn't ask for a cot. She didn't ask for relief. She didn't ask anyone for help. She even gave her very last meal to a starving stranger and prepared to freeze in the dark alone. But on the 5th night, a Navy SEAL stepped out of the shadows, and he didn't come to offer pity. What he left on the hood of her car would change her entire life in ways she never saw coming. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments which country you are watching from, and if you love stories that melt your heart, please subscribe to support our channel. The sky over Northern California did not look like a sky anymore. It was a heavy ceiling of dark orange and black, pressing down on the small mountain town. The sun was completely hidden behind thick layers of smoke. Ash fell from the clouds like gray snow, covering the roads, the vehicles, and the faces of everyone trying to escape. The air smelled of burning pine sap, melted plastic, and raw panic. The heat was a physical weight, pushing against the skin and making every breath feel like inhaling hot sand. Hazel stood in the middle of the main highway intersection, gripping a glowing orange traffic wand. She was a female police officer, 32 years old. Her normally crisp navy blue uniform was stained with soot and sweat. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun, though many strands had escaped and stuck to her damp forehead. She had been awake for 36 hours straight. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her throat burned with every command she shouted over the roar of the distant flames. Inside her parked police cruiser, sitting obediently in the passenger seat, was Titan. He was a large German Shepherd with a thick, handsome black and tan coat. Titan was not an official police K9. He was Hazel's personal dog, her only family, but he refused to leave her side during the chaos. He watched her through the windshield, his ears standing straight up, whining softly whenever she coughed. Sometimes, disaster does not ask if you are ready to be a hero. It simply sets your world on fire and forces you to choose between stepping forward or running away. Hazel had chosen to step forward. "Keep moving," Hazel yelled, waving the wand. "Do not stop here! Follow the taillights ahead of you!" A seemingly endless line of vehicles crawled past her. Pickup trucks loaded with hastily packed boxes, family sedans filled with crying children, and old cars towing horse trailers. People stared at her with wide, terrified eyes. A woman in a silver Honda rolled down her window. "Officer, what about the South Ridge?" The woman cried out, her voice trembling. "My parents live up there." "The fire department is clearing the South Ridge now," Hazel lied. She did not know if anyone was left up there. The radio communications had been failing for an hour. "You need to keep driving. Head toward the county line." "Go." The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face, and rolled the window back up. Hazel took a quick sip from a plastic water bottle hanging at her belt. The water was almost hot, but she swallowed it anyway to soothe her cracked throat. She turned her gaze toward the eastern hillside. That was her neighborhood. The fire had crowned in the treetops there just 2 hours ago, moving faster than any prediction. Through a break in the thick black smoke, she saw the familiar outline of Elm Street. She saw her own house. Flames shot out from the living room windows. The roof glowed a bright, angry cherry red. As she watched, the central beam gave way. The roof collapsed inward, sending a massive shower of bright yellow sparks into the dark sky. Everything she owned was inside that house. Her childhood photographs, her comfortable bed, the little garden she had planted last spring. The life she had built over the last 10 years vanished in a matter of seconds. Hazel stared at the burning ruins of her home for exactly 3 seconds. She felt a sharp, heavy pain in her chest. She swallowed hard, pushing the emotion deep down into her stomach. There was no time to cry. There was no time to mourn. She turned her back to the mountain and faced the highway again. "Stay in line! Keep moving!" she shouted, her voice cracking. Titan let out a loud bark from the cruiser. He knew she was hurting. Dogs always know when their humans are breaking inside. Hazel walked over to the car and rested her hand on the doorframe. Titan poked his head out of the window and licked the soot off her cheek. Suddenly, the police radio on her shoulder crackled to life. A frantic voice broke through the loud static. Dispatch to any available unit. We have a family trapped on Old Mill Road. A burning tree blocked their path. The fire line is closing in on them. Is anyone near Old Mill Road? Hazel grabbed her radio mic. Old Mill Road was exactly 2 miles away, right at the edge of the expanding inferno. Other units were miles out, managing the main evacuation center. Unit 7, I am on it. En route, Hazel replied. She jumped into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. Hold on, buddy, she told Titan. She flipped on the emergency sirens and lights. The cruiser leaped forward, speeding down the empty incoming lane, driving straight toward the red horizon. The closer they got, the hotter the air inside the car became. Smoke seeped through the air conditioning vents. Titan paced nervously in the passenger seat, barking at the flames that licked the edge of the asphalt. Burning branches crashed onto the road. Hazel swerved aggressively to avoid them. Visibility dropped to almost zero. She drove by memory and instinct. Through the thick gray fog, she saw them. A blue minivan sat angled into a shallow ditch, completely blocked by a massive, burning pine tree. A man stood outside, coughing violently, trying to pull a heavy branch away with his bare hands. Inside the van, Hazel saw a woman and 2 small children covering their faces. Hazel stopped the cruiser inches from the flames. She leaped out into the blinding heat. "Leave it!" Hazel yelled, grabbing the man by his shirt. "Get your family in my car, right now!" The man looked at her in shock, his face black with soot. He nodded frantically and ripped the van doors open. He grabbed the children. The woman stumbled out behind him. Hazel opened the rear doors of the patrol cruiser. Titan smartly climbed over the center console and squeezed into the front seat to make maximum room. The family piled into the back, coughing and crying. The heat was unbearable. The paint on the police cruiser began to bubble and blister. Hazel jumped back into the driver's seat and threw the car into reverse. A burning branch dropped heavily onto the hood, leaving a thick scorch mark before sliding off. She spun the steering wheel fast, forcing the heavy vehicle to turn around on the narrow road. The fire roared like a freight train on all sides. She pressed the gas pedal down hard. They broke through the wall of smoke. The air finally cleared slightly as they reached the main highway. The family in the back seat wept loudly in relief. The mother reached forward and touched Hazel's shoulder in silent gratitude. Hazel pulled over at the staging area near the town border. Paramedics rushed to the cruiser to help the family out. Hazel stepped out of the vehicle and looked at her patrol car. The once bright white and black vehicle was completely covered in a thick layer of black soot and ash. The plastic covers of her emergency lights had melted. She walked around to the passenger side. Titan hopped out and stood right by her leg. He nudged her hand with his wet nose. Hazel knelt down on the dirty asphalt. She buried her face in his thick fur for just a moment, taking one deep, shaky breath. Then she stood up, wiped her face with her sleeve, and walked back to the intersection to direct the next line of cars. The engine of the police cruiser ticked as it cooled down. Hazel parked the heavy vehicle behind a deserted strip mall on the outer edge of the evacuation zone. The area sat in complete darkness. The local power grid in this sector had failed 2 days ago, leaving the entire block submerged in thick shadows. She reached out and turned off the headlights. Only the faint green glow of the dashboard radio illuminated the cramped cabin. Hazel unbuckled her seatbelt with stiff fingers. Her shoulders immediately slumped forward. The intense adrenaline that had kept her moving for the past 36 hours evaporated into the smoky air. In its place, a crushing exhaustion settled deep into her bones. She rubbed her dry eyes. Her fingers came away black with thick soot and ash. She did not bother trying to clean them. There was no clean water left to spare for washing hands. A police patrol vehicle is built for authority and speed. It features stiff seats covered in heavy-duty synthetic fabric, thick plastic partitions, and minimal legroom. It is absolutely not designed to serve as a bedroom. Yet, for Hazel, this soot-stained metal box was the only shelter she had left in the entire world. She leaned her head back against the rigid headrest. Her neck cracked loudly in the quiet car. The heavy Kevlar vest underneath her uniform shirt pressed tightly against her chest, making it difficult to draw a full breath. She refused to take it off. Taking the vest off meant going off duty. Going off duty meant she had to go home. And she no longer had a home. Titan climbed clumsily over the center console. The large German Shepherd whined softly, the sound barely louder than the hum of the radio. He placed his front paws on the passenger seat and rested his heavy head directly on Hazel's lap. His dark brown eyes looked up at her in the dim green light. "I know, buddy," Hazel whispered. "I know." She stroked his ears gently. His coat felt unusually coarse, covered in the exact same layer of ash that coated every street, house, and tree in the county. Titan let out a long, heavy sigh. His warm breath seeped through her thick uniform pants. He pressed his muscular body closer to hers, offering his natural body heat against the dropping night temperature. He sensed her deep sadness. Dogs do not need spoken words to understand human loss. They feel the subtle shifts in their owner's heartbeat and breathing. Hazel closed her eyes. The darkness behind her eyelids offered zero relief. Instead, uninvited memories rushed into her mind. Grief has a cruel habit of waiting until the body stops moving before it decides to attack. Now that the cruiser sat completely still, her mind violently replayed the vivid sight of her collapsing roof. She remembered the small kitchen in that house with painful clarity. She remembered the yellow curtains she hung up just last month. Every single morning, she used to sit at the small oak table by the front window, drinking dark roast coffee. Titan would lie quietly on the braided rug by the back door, watching the neighborhood squirrels run along the wooden fence. It was a simple, incredibly quiet routine. That routine felt like it belonged to another lifetime entirely. Now, the bright yellow curtains, the sturdy oak table, and the wooden fence were nothing but gray ash blowing in the hot mountain wind. A sharp lump formed in her throat. She forced herself to swallow it down hard. Crying would not rebuild her shattered house. Crying would not stop the raging fire outside. She desperately needed to sleep. Her eyes burned fiercely. Her head pounded with a dull, rhythmic ache that matched her pulse. But she fought the heavy urge to close her eyes completely. She chose this dark, hidden parking spot behind the strip mall intentionally. The main evacuation camp sat 3 miles away at the high school football field. The camp had canvas cots, hot soup, and medical tents. But if she drove into that brightly lit camp, her commanding officer would spot her immediately. He would see her shaking hands and severely bloodshot eyes. He would order her to stand down, hand over her keys, and force her to rest. Hazel could not do that. Lying on a cot in a crowded tent full of displaced strangers would force her to admit she was exactly like them. She was a victim of the fire. As long as she stayed in the driver's seat, physically gripping the steering wheel, she remained an officer of the law. She remained the active protector, not the helpless protected. Her stubborn pride and unyielding sense of duty formed a rigid wall around her breaking heart. Titan shifted his weight again. He nudged her hand aggressively with his wet nose, demanding more scratches. Hazel smiled faintly into the darkness. She rubbed the thick fur around his neck, letting her fingers massage his tense muscles. "We will figure it out," she told him. Her voice sounded raspy and completely exhausted. "When the sun comes up, we will get back out there. We still have a job to do." Titan closed his eyes and let out a soft grunt of approval. The rapid rhythm of his breathing slowly calmed down. Hazel focused all her attention on the steady sound of his breath. It grounded her racing thoughts. It successfully kept the rising panic away. She let her head rest sideways against the glass window. The glass felt pleasantly cool against her hot, flushed skin. Slowly, the overwhelming physical exhaustion dragged her downward toward a deep sleep. The sharp edges of her awareness finally began to blur. Suddenly, a massive, deafening boom shattered the quiet night. The violent sound rolled across the valley like a bomb blast. The solid ground beneath the police cruiser vibrated violently. Hazel jolted fully awake. Her eyes snapped open wide. Titan barked loudly, the thick hair on his back standing straight up in alarm. Hazel looked through the dirty windshield. 2 miles to the north, a brilliant flash of neon blue and bright orange light tore the dark night sky open. Showers of sparks rained down like a deadly fireworks show over the distant black tree line. The main electrical substation had just exploded. 1 second later, the radio on her dashboard erupted into a frantic frenzy of loud, static, and overlapping voices. All units! All units! We have a catastrophic failure at the Northridge substation. The explosion has sparked a secondary fire line moving aggressively toward the residential sector. The dispatcher's voice cracked noticeably with raw panic. We need immediate emergency evacuations in Sector 4. Any available units in the vicinity respond immediately. Hazel did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. The heavy exhaustion vanished instantly, replaced entirely by cold, sharp adrenaline flooding her veins. She reached forward quickly and grabbed the radio microphone from its mount. Unit 7 responding, Hazel said firmly. I am 2 miles out, heading directly to Sector 4 now. She dropped the microphone back onto the seat. She turned the ignition key hard. The cruiser's engine roared back to life with a familiar growl. She slammed her hand down onto the light bar switch. The red and blue emergency lights instantly painted the dark alley in frantic flashing colors. Hang on, Titan, she commanded sharply. She shifted the car into drive and hit the gas pedal aggressively. The rear tires spun wildly on the loose gravel before finally catching traction. The heavy police cruiser launched forward rapidly, speeding out from behind the abandoned strip mall and turning sharply back onto the main highway. The long night was far from over, and Hazel was absolutely not ready to stop fighting for her town. Morning arrived without the sun. The thick canopy of smoke above the town turned daylight into a dull, muddy brown glow. At the main high school parking lot, the sound of heavy diesel engines replaced the crackle of the distant fire. The military had arrived. A long convoy of National Guard transport trucks rolled into the staging area, bringing desperately needed manpower and supplies. Jackson stepped down from the passenger side of a heavy tactical vehicle. He was an active-duty Navy SEAL, 35 years old, with broad shoulders and a sharply defined jawline. He wore a standard camouflage field uniform, dusty boots, and a tactical vest. He was currently on a brief domestic assignment, embedded with the Guard unit to help coordinate disaster logistics. Jackson possessed a quiet demeanor and eyes that constantly scanned his surroundings, absorbing every detail without broadcasting a single thought. The staging area was organized chaos. Tents went up rapidly. Soldiers unloaded heavy pallets of bottled water, medical kits, and ready-to-eat meals. Local police officers guided evacuated citizens toward the registration tables. Hazel parked her soot-covered cruiser near the perimeter. She stepped out, her boots hitting the asphalt heavily. Titan jumped out right behind her. The large German Shepherd stayed glued to her left leg, his ears swiveling to track the loud noises of the busy camp. Hazel adjusted her utility belt and walked straight toward the main distribution point to manage the growing crowd. Jackson stood by the water pallets, coordinating the unloading process. He noticed Hazel almost immediately. Among the dozens of exhausted first responders, she stood out. Her uniform was completely ruined by black ash. Her face carried dark streaks of soot, but it was not the dirt that caught his attention, it was her posture. People under extreme stress try very hard to look normal, but the body always tells the truth. Jackson recognized the specific stiffness in Hazel's shoulders. He saw the slight, uncontrollable tremor in her fingers when she pointed toward the registration line. He watched the way she blinked slowly, fighting the heavy weight of her eyelids. He had seen that exact physical state on the faces of soldiers after a brutal 3-day firefight in the desert. It was the absolute limit of human endurance. She was running purely on fumes and raw stubbornness. Jackson did not stare, but he kept her in his peripheral vision. He respected anyone who pushed themselves that far for others. He also knew how dangerous that edge could be. By noon, the temperature spiked. The camp swelled with hundreds of displaced residents. Panic is a highly contagious disease. When people lose their homes and face uncertainty, fear quickly overrides logic and basic manners. A supply truck backed up to the distribution line to drop off a new pallet of bottled water. The crowd saw the water and surged forward aggressively. The neat lines dissolved in seconds. People pushed against each other, desperate to secure their share. At the front of the mob, two men collided hard. One man dropped his empty plastic bag. He grabbed the other man by the collar of his shirt. "I was here first," the first man shouted, pulling his fist back. "Get your hands off that case." "My kids need water," the second man screamed back, shoving him hard against the side of the truck. The crowd around them panicked and backed away, creating a tight circle of tension. A few people started yelling for help. Hazel did not hesitate. She pushed through the crowd, stepping directly between the two angry men. She did not draw her weapon or her baton. She used the only tool she had left. "Let go of his shirt," Hazel commanded. Her voice was not loud, but it carried a sharp, unyielding authority. "Let it go right now." The first man glared at her, chest heaving. He looked at the soot on her uniform, the exhaustion in her eyes, and the large German shepherd standing rigidly at her side. Titan bared his teeth slightly, a low rumble vibrating in his throat. The man slowly opened his hand and stepped back. Hazel looked at both of them. "You are both getting water?" she said firmly. "There is enough on this truck for everyone in this line, but if you throw a punch in my camp, I will put you in cuffs and you will wait in the back of my cruiser without air conditioning. Do you understand me?" Both men looked down at the asphalt and nodded. The tension in the air evaporated. Hazel instructed the soldiers to start handing out the cases. Order returned to the line. Jackson watched the entire exchange from the back of the truck. He was impressed. She had de-escalated a violent situation using only presence and tone. Hazel watched the line move smoothly for a few minutes. Then she turned away from the crowd. She walked around the back of the large military transport truck, seeking a moment of privacy in its shadow. The second she was out of public view, the adrenaline vanished. A severe wave of hypoglycemia slammed into her. Her vision blurred violently, turning the edges of the world gray. Her knees buckled under her own weight. She stumbled forward, her hands shooting out to grab the warm metal hood of a parked Humvee. She leaned her entire body weight against the vehicle, gasping for air. Her chest heaved rapidly. Black spots danced in her eyes. She gripped the metal so tightly her knuckles turned white. Titan let out a sharp whine. He pressed his heavy body firmly against the back of her knees, physically bracing her so she would not collapse onto the ground. Jackson saw her stumble. He immediately stepped away from the water pallets and walked quickly toward her. He closed the distance in seconds. He raised his hand to grab her shoulder and steady her. He stopped just 3 feet away. His hand dropped back to his side. Jackson knew the pride of a person in uniform. He knew that if he touched her now, if he asked if she was okay, it would force her to admit she was failing. It would break the fragile armor she was using to survive the day. He stood quietly in the shadow of the truck, watching the police officer and her dog, waiting just in case she completely fell. Hazel took 3 deep, ragged breaths. She pushed herself off the hood. Her legs shook, but she locked her knees and stood up straight. She patted Titan's head, adjusted her duty belt, and walked back out into the sun to finish her shift. Jackson watched her go, his expression unreadable, but a deep sense of respect took root in his mind. The afternoon faded into a murky, smoke-filled twilight. The local high school football field no longer looked like a place for community sports. It resembled a wartime triage center. The air hummed constantly with the loud, vibrating sound of portable diesel generators. Ash continued to fall from the dark sky, coating the brightly colored nylon medical tents in a thick layer of gray dust. At the main supply tent, the line for food stretched all the way across the rubber running track. The National Guard had brought massive pallets of meals ready to eat and deployed a mobile kitchen unit that served hot soup. But the sheer number of evacuees completely overwhelmed the initial military supply projections. The mobile kitchen firmly shut its serving windows at exactly 6 o'clock. The large metal pots were completely empty. Only a small stack of brown plastic MRE pouches remained on a folding table. Hazel stood near the supply table. She had not eaten a real meal in 2 days. Her stomach cramped violently, forming a tight knot of pure acid and emptiness. People often believe that hunger is merely a sharp pain in the stomach, but true starvation is actually a slow, creeping cold that numbs the brain and makes the limbs feel like heavy lead. It drains the focus from the eyes and makes every single physical movement require a monumental effort of will. Hazel felt that creeping cold seeping deeply into her fingers and toes. She stepped up to the table. A young, exhausted soldier handed her a single brown pouch. It was a beef stew ration. "Last one for this sector, officer," the soldier said, his face lined with dark soot and fatigue. "We get a new resupply truck at dawn." Hazel nodded in silent thanks. She gripped the warm pouch tightly. The heat radiated through her dirty leather gloves. Titan sat next to her right leg, his wet nose twitching rapidly. He smelled the preserved meat inside the sealed plastic. Hazel looked down at him and offered a tired, weak smile. "We will split it, buddy," she whispered. She turned to walk back to her parked cruiser. Before she could take 3 steps, a frail, trembling voice called out behind her. "Excuse me, please!" Hazel stopped immediately and turned around. An elderly man stood a few feet away. He had introduced himself earlier in the day as Arthur Abernathy. He was 75 years old, frail, wearing a faded plaid flannel shirt and holding a crushed straw hat in his shaking hands. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with the deep confusion that often accompanies sudden, catastrophic loss. "They said the hot soup is gone?" Arthur said, his voice shaking with panic. "I was trying to find my wife's blood pressure medication in the medical tent. I missed the dinner line. They told me there is absolutely no food left." Hazel looked at the old man. She saw the deep, dark hollows under his eyes and the severe tremor in his thin hands. He looked incredibly fragile, like a strong gust of mountain wind could knock him over completely. She looked down at the brown pouch in her hand. Her stomach twisted painfully, aggressively demanding fuel. She swallowed hard, pushing her own biological needs aside. "Mr. Abernathy," Hazel said gently. She stepped forward and pressed the warm pouch directly into his shaking hands. "Take this. It is beef stew. It is hot." The old man looked down at the food, then up at her soot-stained face. "No, officer. You need this. You are out here working the perimeter. I cannot take your dinner." "I already ate," Hazel lied smoothly. She forced a bright, reassuring smile onto her tired face. "I had a big sandwich at the command post an hour ago. This was just an extra ration. Please, take it." Arthur clutched the warm pouch tightly to his chest. Tears pooled in his cloudy eyes. "Thank you. God bless you." He turned and shuffled slowly back toward the crowded civilian tents. Hazel watched him go. As soon as he was completely out of sight, her fake smile vanished. She sagged slightly, the heavy fatigue pressing down hard on her shoulders. Titan did not like the situation at all. The German shepherd let out a high, distressed whine. He nudged her thigh hard with his snout. He reached up and gently caught the fabric of her uniform sleeve in his teeth, tugging downward persistently. He knew she was starving. He knew the lie. Dogs do not understand human pride or stoic sacrifice. They only understand pack survival. And his pack leader was rapidly deteriorating. "Stop it, Titan," Hazel muttered softly, pulling her arm away from his grip. "I am fine. Let's go do our perimeter check." She walked away, her steps noticeably slower and heavier than they were 10 minutes ago. Standing 20 yards away, partially concealed by the shadow of a large supply truck, Jackson watched the entire scene unfold. His eyes darkened. He had heard the lie clearly. He saw the exact way she handed over her only source of calories without a single second of hesitation. He also saw the dog's distressed reaction. Animals never lie about their owner's physical condition. Jackson felt a familiar, uncomfortable tightness in his chest. He recognized that specific brand of quiet self-sacrifice. It was the exact same stubborn, reckless dedication he had seen in his own combat teammates. People who put the uniform and the mission before their own bodies. People who would quietly starve to death to ensure the civilians they protected stayed fed and safe. He did not intervene right then. Confronting her in public would only make her highly defensive. Midnight finally arrived. The noisy camp settled down into a restless sleep. The temperature plummeted rapidly, replacing the harsh daytime heat with a bitter, biting mountain chill. Hazel parked her cruiser in her usual secluded spot behind the abandoned strip mall. She turned off the engine to save her remaining gasoline. The interior of the car quickly grew freezing cold. Hazel curled into a tight, uncomfortable ball on the stiff driver's seat. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, desperately trying to quiet the painful hunger cramps. Titan lay fully across her lap, acting as a heavy, fur-covered blanket. She shivered violently in the dark. Her teeth chattered loudly in the silent cabin. Back at the military command tent, Jackson moved with quiet, deliberate purpose. He walked over to his personal tactical gear bag. He pulled out 2 premium military rations, the specific kind reserved strictly for special operations units. They contained high-calorie meals, chemical heating pads, and instant coffee packets. He activated the heating pads quickly, waiting until the thick pouches grew piping hot. He slipped out of the camp, walking silently through the dark, abandoned streets. He moved like a ghost, his heavy boots making absolutely no sound on the ash-covered pavement. He navigated the back alleys perfectly until he spotted the dark silhouette of the police cruiser behind the strip mall. Jackson approached the vehicle from the rear blind spot. He moved with absolute military precision. He reached the driver's side door. He could easily see Hazel through the glass, slumped over the steering wheel, shaking uncontrollably from the cold and severe hunger. Titan was fast asleep on her lap. Jackson did not knock on the window. He gently placed the 2 steaming hot pouches directly on the flat metal surface of the hood, right in front of the windshield. He quickly added a small, insulated metal thermos filled with hot black coffee. He stepped backward into the deep shadows and melted away entirely into the darkness, leaving absolutely no footprints on the hard asphalt. A few minutes later, the rich, savory smell of heated beef and dark coffee seeped slowly through the cruiser's air vents. Titan woke up instantly. His wet nose twitched aggressively. He let out a sharp, alert bark and pawed rapidly at the windshield. Hazel jolted awake, her hand instinctively dropping to her duty belt. She blinked hard through the dirty glass. There, sitting perfectly centered on the hood of her patrol car, were 2 hot meals and a metal thermos. Steam curled up beautifully from the packages in the freezing night air. She quickly unbuckled her seatbelt and pushed the heavy door open. The freezing wind hit her face like a physical blow. She stepped out and looked quickly up and down the dark, empty alley. There was absolutely no one there. The street was completely deserted. She reached out carefully and touched the thermos. It was burning hot. She looked down at the tactical rations. Her empty stomach let out a loud, demanding growl. She scanned the deep shadows one more time, a profound sense of confusion and overwhelming gratitude washing over her tired mind. She did not know exactly who was watching her, but for the first time in 3 exhausting days, she realized she was not entirely alone in the dark. The sky finally broke open. After 4 days of relentless darkness, a pale, anemic sun managed to push its way through the thinning layers of smoke. The primary fire lines were holding steady. The massive blaze that had threatened to wipe the entire county off the map was now largely contained to the upper mountain ridges. Down in the valley, the town looked exactly like a war zone. Entire residential blocks were reduced to white ash, twisted metal, and blackened brick chimneys, standing completely alone in the rubble. Hazel stood near the open door of her cruiser, surveying the widespread destruction. She held the empty metal thermos in her hands. The hot coffee and the military food ration from the anonymous stranger had given her the physical strength to survive the freezing night, but the daylight brought an entirely different kind of exhaustion. Reality. The adrenaline that had fueled her for days was rapidly fading, leaving behind the crushing, undeniable weight of her circumstances. She had no house. She had no bed. She had absolutely nothing left but the dirty uniform on her back and the loyal German shepherd sitting quietly at her feet. Titan pressed his heavy head against her knee. He sensed the drastic shift in her mood. The immediate danger of the fire was gone, which meant the protective numbness was wearing off. The sharp pain of loss was waiting patiently to take its place. Hazel reached down and ran her fingers through his ash-covered fur. She did not cry. Crying required energy she simply did not possess. Across the staging area, Jackson stood by the supply trucks, helping soldiers load empty wooden pallets. He watched Hazel from a distance. The way she stood, rigid and profoundly isolated, triggered a very specific memory in his mind. 10 years ago, in a dusty, sun-baked valley in Afghanistan, his teammate Mark had taken shrapnel to his side during a brutal ambush. Mark had hidden his bleeding for 6 straight hours so the medical evacuation helicopter could prioritize the wounded civilian casualties. Mark survived the ordeal, but Jackson never forgot the cold, vacant look in his eyes that day. It was the look of someone who had decided their own pain was completely irrelevant compared to the mission. Grief is not always a sudden, loud explosion. It is often a slow, methodical thief that empties a person out from the inside, leaving only the rigid scaffolding of duty and routine to hold them upright. Jackson recognized that brittle scaffolding in Hazel. He knew exactly how easily it could snap. Jackson walked over to the civilian registration tent. A local police dispatcher named Sarah sat behind a folding plastic table. Sarah was a young woman in her early 20s, with frizzy brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail and thick reading glasses. She was currently sorting through massive stacks of intake forms. "Excuse me," Jackson said quietly, stepping up to the table. Sarah looked up, her eyes wide and exhausted behind her thick lenses. "Yes, Sergeant? Can I help you find something?" "I need some information on one of your local officers," Jackson replied, keeping his voice low to avoid drawing attention. "The female officer with the German Shepherd. She has been working Sector 4. Sarah sighed heavily, her tired shoulders dropping. "Officer Hazel?" "Yeah. What do you need to know about her? Where is she staying right now?" Jackson asked directly. "Her shift ends soon. The military is packing up our portable cots today. I want to make sure she has a safe place to rest." Sarah shook her head slowly, a sad expression crossing her face. "I really do not know. Her house on Elm Street was one of the very first to go up in flames on Tuesday afternoon. It is a total loss. Nothing left but the foundation. She has been on active duty ever since. The captain ordered everyone to submit their disaster relief forms to FEMA, but she has not handed hers in yet. I honestly think she is sleeping in her patrol cruiser." Jackson thanked Sarah and walked away. His jaw tightened visibly. He knew exactly what Hazel was doing. She was deliberately making herself a ghost in the system so the limited town resources could go to the civilians instead of her. Later that afternoon, Hazel walked into the makeshift police command post to clock out. The air inside the large canvas tent was thick with the smell of stale sweat and cheap burnt coffee. Captain Miller stood behind a folding table covered in deployment maps. Miller was a heavily built man in his late 50s, with a thick gray mustache and deep dark bags under his eyes. He looked up from the maps as Hazel approached. "Hazel," Miller said, his voice extremely rough from shouting over the radio all week. "Good work out there on the perimeter today. The fire department says the south line is fully secure." "Thank you, sir," Hazel replied automatically. Titan sat obediently by the canvas tent flap, waiting patiently for her to finish. Miller picked up a heavy wooden clipboard. "Listen to me. I am going through the personnel damage reports. I do not have yours. I heard Elm Street got wiped out completely. You need to fill this form out right now so we can get you a hotel voucher and an emergency relief check." Hazel stood perfectly still. She looked at the clipboard in his hand, then up at her captain. "That will not be necessary, sir." Miller frowned deeply, lowering the clipboard to the table. "What do you mean it will not be necessary? You lost your house." "I have a safe place to stay," Hazel lied smoothly. Her voice did not shake. Her face remained a perfectly blank professional mask. "My aunt lives in the next county over. I am going to stay in her spare bedroom until the insurance claims clear. Give the hotel voucher to one of the families sleeping in the high school gym. They need it a lot more than I do." Miller stared at her for a long, silent moment. He was severely exhausted, simply too tired to argue or investigate her story further. He slowly nodded and set the pen down. All right. If you are absolutely sure, get out of here, Hazel. Take the next 2 days off. That is a direct order. Understood, sir, Hazel said firmly. She turned around and walked out of the tent, Titan following closely at her heels. Jackson stood just outside the canvas flap, holding a clipboard of his own. He had come to deliver a final logistics report to the police captain. He had heard every single word of their conversation. He watched Hazel walk away across the dusty parking lot, her shoulders unnaturally tight, her dog staying right by her side. He knew she did not have an aunt in the next county. He knew she was going to drive that dirty police cruiser to another dark parking lot and freeze through another miserable night. Jackson looked down at the logistics report in his hand. The military mission here was almost over. They would be pulling out in 48 hours, but his personal mission had just begun. He turned on his heel and walked toward the communication truck. He had a few very important phone calls to make. By Friday morning, the massive wall of flames had officially burned itself out. The thick layer of smoke finally lifted, revealing a bright blue sky that felt entirely out of place above the blackened landscape. The military received their orders to withdraw completely. The National Guard units began breaking down the canvas tents and loading the heavy supply trucks. The emergency rescue phase was officially over. The long, painful recovery phase had just begun. Hazel stood at the main checkpoint on the western edge of town. Her job today was to verify identification cards and allow residents back into the disaster zone to survey their properties. It was a heartbreaking and exhausting assignment. She watched car after car roll up to the wooden barricade. She looked directly into the faces of her neighbors. Some people wept openly over the steering wheel as they saw the ruined hillsides. Others stared straight ahead with blank, empty eyes, unable to process the scale of the destruction. A battered red pickup truck pulled up to the checkpoint. A man rolled down the window. His young daughter sat in the passenger seat, holding a small stuffed bear. Hazel recognized the man from the evacuation center. "Officer Hazel," the man said softly. "Thank you for keeping us safe this week. We do not know what is left of our street, but we are alive because of you." Hazel nodded, forcing a gentle smile for the little girl. "Drive safely, sir. Watch out for down power lines." The hardest part of a disaster is not the destructive event itself. It is the terrible, suffocating quiet that follows, when the adrenaline completely fades and the mind is finally forced to count exactly what was lost. Hazel understood that heavy quiet perfectly. She carried it deeply within her own chest. Titan sat patiently beside her heavy boots. He did not bark at the passing cars or the loud diesel engines in the distance. He simply leaned his muscular shoulder against her leg, offering a solid anchor in a world that felt completely unstable. Hazel reached down and patted his head every single time a car passed through the checkpoint, drawing quiet strength from his steady presence. On the other side of town, Jackson did not immediately pack his tactical gear. He walked away from the military staging area and headed straight toward the temporary town hall. The original municipal building had burned down to the ground on Tuesday. The local government now operated out of a surviving middle school gymnasium on the safe side of the river. Jackson stepped into the loud, chaotic gym. He found Mayor Thomas Harrison sitting behind a long folding table. The mayor was a man in his late 60s, completely bald, wearing a deeply wrinkled gray suit that smelled of stale smoke and old coffee. He looked incredibly tired, surrounded by tall stacks of federal relief applications and ringing telephones. "Excuse me, Mr. Mayor," Jackson said, stopping directly in front of the table. Harrison looked up, rubbing his exhausted eyes. "Yes, Sergeant? Is there a problem with the military withdrawal logistics?" "No, sir. The convoy leaves in exactly 3 hours. I am here for a personal matter," Jackson replied. He pulled a thick, sealed white envelope from his tactical vest and placed it flat on the wooden table. "What is this?" Harrison asked, looking at the unmarked envelope. "I run a private military relief foundation," Jackson explained, keeping his voice low and completely level. "We specifically support first responders and veterans who lose everything in the line of duty. I need you to secure an apartment lease in the neighboring town for Officer Hazel. Pay the rent for an entire year up front. Buy her new furniture, dog food, and groceries. The funds are inside this envelope. The mayor carefully opened the envelope. His eyes widened in absolute shock. He looked at the certified bank draft, then back up at the Navy SEAL standing before him. "Son, this is a massive amount of money. Why do you not just hand it to her yourself? She deserves to know who is helping her. People who wear a uniform do not accept charity easily," Jackson said firmly. "If I hand her a check, her pride will force her to refuse it. She will say someone else needs it more. You have to tell her it is an anonymous grant from the city council. Make it look completely official. Provide fake paperwork if you have to. Do not mention the military. Do not mention my name." Mayor Harrison nodded slowly, a look of profound respect settling on his tired face. "I understand. I will take care of the arrangements personally. You have my word." Jackson left the gymnasium and walked out into the empty school courtyard. He pulled out his encrypted satellite phone and dialed a secure number. The call routed directly to his foundation manager back in San Diego. "The funds transferred successfully," the manager said over the line. "Are you sure about this, Jackson?" "That completely empties our emergency reserve account for the quarter." "I am absolutely sure," Jackson replied without hesitation. "She is sleeping in her patrol car and giving her own food away to the hungry civilians. She has a German Shepherd with her. She is holding the entire police line together, and she has absolutely nothing left. We take care of our own. Refill the account next quarter." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He felt a deep sense of relief wash over him. It did not erase the terrible nightmares of his past deployments, but it provided a solid piece of evidence that some things in this broken world could still be fixed. Late in the afternoon, the loud blast of a military horn echoed across the valley. The convoy was finally ready to roll out. Hazel finished her shift at the checkpoint. The wooden barricades were officially removed. She drove her soot-stained cruiser slowly down the ruined streets of her old neighborhood. She parked the car near the blackened concrete foundation of what used to be her house. She stepped out into the quiet air. Titan jumped out and followed her closely, sniffing the burnt ground. Hazel walked over to the front concrete steps. They were the only part of the entire house still fully intact. She sat down heavily on the cold, ash-covered concrete. She rested her elbows on her knees and buried her face in her dirty hands. She did not cry. She just sat there in silence, breathing in the strong smell of burnt wood, feeling the crushing weight of the unknown future pressing down on her shoulders. Titan climbed up the steps and laid his heavy head gently on her lap. A quarter-mile away, the long line of heavy green military trucks began to slowly move down the main highway. Jackson sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle. He rolled the window down. As the truck passed the ruined neighborhood, he looked out across the massive field of gray ash. He saw Hazel sitting on the broken steps with her dog. They looked incredibly small against the vast backdrop of total destruction. Jackson did not wave. He did not call out her name. He simply raised his right hand and tapped his chest twice, right over his heart. It was a silent, solemn promise to the ghosts of his fallen teammates. He had promised them he would never walk past a fellow protector in need. Today, he had kept that promise perfectly. The heavy truck picked up speed, carrying him away from the mountain valley, leaving Hazel and Titan alone in the quiet afternoon, entirely unaware of the miracle coming their way. 4 days passed since the military convoy rolled out of the valley. The thick gray ash on the ground slowly turned into a hardened crust after a brief, light rain. The town began the slow, painful process of cleaning up. Heavy dump trucks replaced the fire engines on the main roads. The air still smelled strongly of wet charcoal, but the sky remained clear. Hazel continued her shifts without taking a single day off. She directed heavy construction traffic, guarded the damaged commercial district, and helped returning residents file their official insurance reports. At night, she still parked her soot-stained police cruiser behind the abandoned strip mall. The nights grew noticeably colder. Her physical exhaustion settled deeply into her bones, but she refused to stop moving. Stopping meant she had to face the reality of her empty future. On Tuesday morning, her radio cracked to life. Dispatch instructed her to report directly to the temporary town hall located in the middle school gymnasium. Hazel parked her cruiser near the basketball courts. Titan jumped out and walked closely beside her as they entered the loud, crowded building. People stood in long lines, waiting to talk to insurance adjusters and federal relief workers. Hazel walked past the lines and headed straight for the makeshift mayor's office near the back bleachers. Mayor Thomas Harrison sat behind a heavily cluttered folding table. He looked up when Hazel approached. "Officer Hazel," the mayor said, standing up quickly. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit down." Hazel remained standing perfectly straight. "I am currently on active duty, sir. What do you need?" Harrison let out a slow, tired breath. He reached into his suit jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, unmarked white envelope. He placed it squarely on the center of the wooden table and pushed it slowly toward her. "I need you to take this," Harrison said firmly. Hazel looked down at the blank envelope. "What is it?" "It is a lease agreement for a furnished apartment in the next town over," the mayor explained. "The rent is paid in full for an entire year. The utilities are covered. The apartment allows large dogs. There is a set of keys inside that envelope, along with a prepaid gift card for a local grocery store." Hazel stared at the white paper. Her mind completely blanked. She did not reach for it. "I do not understand," Hazel said, her voice dropping. "The city does not have the budget for individual housing grants. The federal relief funds have not even cleared yet. I cannot accept town money, Mr. Mayor. There are families with small children sleeping in the high school cafeteria." "This is not town money," Harrison replied quickly. "It is a private grant." "From who?" Hazel demanded. Her posture immediately stiffened. "I will not accept a handout from a local business or a citizen. It violates department policy." Harrison shook his head. "It is an anonymous donation. The donor explicitly requested that you receive it. They set up the entire arrangement through a private foundation." "I need a name," Hazel insisted. Her hands gripped her heavy-duty belt tightly. "I need to know exactly who paid for this." "I cannot give you a name," Harrison said gently. "The donor told me you would try to refuse it out of pride. They told me you would say someone else needs it more. But they also wanted me to tell you that people who spend their lives protecting others deserve a safe place to sleep. Take the envelope, officer. That is a direct order from the mayor's office. Pride is an incredibly heavy piece of armor. It keeps a person standing when everything else collapses. But true kindness is the only force capable of piercing that armor without causing a fatal wound." Hazel looked down at the envelope. She looked down at Titan, who sat patiently on the hard gymnasium floor. The large dog looked up at her with tired, loyal eyes. He deserved a warm floor. He deserved a real bowl of water. Hazel reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the envelope. It felt impossibly heavy. "Thank you," she whispered. Her throat felt incredibly tight. She left the gymnasium and walked back to her cruiser. She drove straight to the address printed on the paperwork. The apartment building sat on a quiet, tree-lined street 10 miles away from the burn zone. The air here smelled like pine needles and clean rain, entirely free of smoke. Hazel unlocked the front door and pushed it open. The apartment was small but perfectly clean. Sunlight streamed through the large front window, illuminating a comfortable gray sofa and a small wooden dining table. A thick, soft rug covered the living room floor. Hazel walked slowly into the kitchen. She found a brand-new bag of premium dog food sitting on the counter next to 2 shiny metal bowls. Her chest heaved heavily. She walked into the single bedroom. A large bed sat in the center of the room, covered with a thick white quilt. Titan did not wait for permission. The German Shepherd walked right up to the bed, jumped onto the soft mattress, and let out a loud, groaning sigh of pure physical relief. He curled into a tight ball and closed his eyes immediately. Hazel sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. The mattress gave way perfectly under her weight. For the first time in 10 days, she was not sitting on a stiff synthetic car seat. The profound silence of the room wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. She looked down at her hands. She still held the keys to the apartment. The metal felt cool against her skin. A simple brass key was attached to a plain black metal keychain. She turned the keychain over with her thumb. On the back of the black metal, engraved very small but perfectly clear, was a specific symbol. An eagle holding an anchor, a trident, and a flintlock pistol. The official emblem of the Navy SEALs. Hazel stopped breathing. Her mind instantly flashed back to the dusty staging area. She saw the tall soldier in the camouflage field uniform standing by the supply trucks. She remembered the exact way he had watched her stumble near the Humvee without rushing over to pity her. She remembered the 2 steaming hot military rations placed carefully on the hood of her cruiser in the freezing darkness. He had noticed her. He had seen the absolute depth of her exhaustion, and he had quietly stepped in to carry the weight she stubbornly refused to drop. He did not want her gratitude. He did not want public recognition. He simply wanted her to survive. Hazel clutched the keychain tightly in her fist and pressed it hard against her chest. The rigid walls she had built around her heart over the last 10 days finally cracked. The tears she had stubbornly refused to shed spilled over her eyelashes. She leaned forward, buried her face in Titan's soft fur, and finally allowed herself to cry in the safety of a real home. 6 months passed. The harsh, bitter winter finally gave way to a bright and unusually warm spring in Northern California. The deep scars of the massive wildfire still marked the distant mountainsides in jagged swaths of black, but close to the ground, tiny green shoots pushed their way stubbornly through the crust of ash. Nature possessed an incredible capacity for forgiveness and renewal. Hazel stood in the center of her large, fenced backyard. The apartment the anonymous donor had secured for her came with a massive plot of land bordering a quiet pine grove. She did not let the space go to waste. In the weeks following the disaster, the local animal shelters had completely overflowed with displaced pets. Hazel had quietly converted her sprawling backyard into a temporary sanctuary for dogs that had lost their homes to the flames. Healing is rarely a straight line. It is a messy, chaotic process, often requiring us to care for others before we can truly care for ourselves. Hazel found her own healing not in quiet, sterile isolation, but in the loud, demanding presence of abandoned animals. Every time she fed a frightened stray or bandaged a burnt paw, she rebuilt a small, broken piece of her own shattered life. Currently, 7 dogs ran freely across the green grass. A small, nervous terrier mix named Buster chased a yellow tennis ball. A golden retriever with a missing ear slept peacefully in the warm sunlight. In the center of the yard, Titan sat like a proud, vigilant king. The large German Shepherd had naturally assumed the role of the pack leader. He was exceptionally gentle with the terrified puppies and strictly corrected the older dogs when they played too rough. He no longer smelled of thick smoke and fear. His dark black and tan coat shined brightly in the sun. Hazel watched Titan with a soft smile. She wore a simple gray cotton t-shirt and faded blue jeans. Her crisp police uniform hung neatly inside her closet, ready for her upcoming night shift. She felt completely grounded. The suffocating weight of total loss that had paralyzed her 6 months ago was entirely gone. She had a safe home. She had a clear purpose. She held the black metal keychain with the Navy SEAL emblem in her pocket every single day, drawing quiet strength from the tangible proof that someone out there genuinely cared. The sound of heavy tires crunching on gravel broke the peaceful afternoon silence. Hazel turned her head. A dark gray pickup truck pulled slowly into her long driveway and shifted into park. The engine cut off. The driver's side door opened. Titan stood up immediately. His ears swiveled forward. He let out a single, sharp bark of alert, but he did not growl. He trotted over to the chain-link fence, his tail wagging slowly in a gesture of cautious curiosity. A man stepped out of the truck. He did not wear a camouflage field uniform. He wore a plain white t-shirt, dark jeans, and brown leather boots. Without the heavy tactical gear, he looked slightly different, but the broad shoulders and the quiet, intensely observant eyes were absolutely unmistakable. It was Jackson. Hazel froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She instinctively reached into her pocket and closed her fingers tightly around the cold metal keychain. Jackson walked up to the fence. He looked down at Titan, offering the back of his hand. Titan sniffed his knuckles thoroughly, let out a soft whine of approval, and licked his skin. Jackson smiled gently and scratched the big dog directly behind the ears. He finally looked up and met Hazel's eyes. "I was driving through the area," Jackson said. His voice was calm and steady. "I heard a local police officer started a rescue operation for fire dogs. I thought I would stop by and see it." Hazel walked slowly toward the fence. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribs. She stopped 2 feet away from him. She looked at his face, remembering the tall soldier standing in the smoky shadows of the distribution tent, watching her give away her absolute last meal. "You are not just driving through," Hazel said quietly. Jackson did not break eye contact. He rested his hands lightly on the top rail of the metal fence. "No, I am not." Hazel pulled her hand out of her pocket. She held up the black metal keychain. The bright sunlight caught the engraved eagle and trident perfectly. "Why?" Hazel asked. Her voice shook slightly, betraying the deep emotion she usually kept completely hidden. "Why did you do it? You did not even know my name." "You just saw a tired cop in a dirty parking lot." Jackson looked at the keychain, then back at her. The tough, disciplined exterior of the Navy SEAL softened entirely. "Because I know exactly what that level of exhaustion looks like," Jackson replied. "I know what it means to put the uniform and the mission far above your own survival. I watched you give your only hot meal to a stranger when you were starving. I watched you refuse aid because you firmly believed someone else needed it more. People like you hold the world together, Hazel. But sometimes the people holding the world together desperately need someone to hold them." He paused, taking a slow, deep breath. "I lost a teammate a long time ago. He starved himself on a mission to keep civilians fed. I promised him I would never walk past a fellow protector in need. You did not ask for help, but you absolutely earned it." A warm tear slipped down Hazel's cheek. She did not bother wiping it away. She looked around at her safe, beautiful yard. She looked at the happy, rescued dogs playing in the sun. She looked at Titan, who sat happily at Jackson's feet. "You saved my life," Hazel whispered. "You gave me the solid ground to stand on so I could build all of this." "You built this," Jackson corrected her gently. "I just handed you the keys." Hazel smiled. It was a real, bright smile that finally reached her eyes. She reached out and unlatched the heavy metal gate. She pulled it open wide. "Come inside," Hazel said. "Titan wants to show you his yard, and I think I owe you a cup of hot coffee." Jackson smiled back. He stepped through the gate and walked into the sunlight. The long, dark nightmare of the fire was finally over. From the gray ashes of profound loss, a brilliant green shoot of hope had broken through the soil, watered by a silent act of kindness and ready to grow into something incredibly beautiful. Sometimes the heaviest armor a person can wear is their own pride. We see the uniform, the badge, and the unwavering dedication, and we easily forget that beneath it all is a human being who might be carrying the weight of the entire world completely alone. Officer Hazel gave everything she had to her community, even when she had absolutely nothing left for herself. But true kindness does not wait to be asked. It notices the quiet struggles. It steps in from the shadows, just like Jackson did, not for praise or public recognition, but simply because it is the right thing to do. When we look out for one another, especially those who spend their lives protecting us, we weave a beautiful safety net of compassion that can catch anyone when they fall. A single, anonymous act of generosity can rebuild a shattered life from the ashes and remind a broken heart that they are never truly walking alone in the dark. May God bless you abundantly, watch over your family, and grant you the strength and awareness to be that silent guardian for someone else in their darkest hour. If you believe in the incredible power of unexpected kindness, please type Amen in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please share it with your friends and family. Leave a comment to let us know your thoughts, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories that remind us of the absolute good in this world.